Well, hello and welcome back to the General Purpose Podcast. My name's Tom. I'm the Chief AI Officer at General Purpose Training, and I am once again joined by Mel, one of our instructors. Mel, please introduce yourself.
Hello, Tom. It's great to be on the podcast again. I'm Melanie Muller, the Chief AI Officer at Gen Futures Lab. And as Tom said, also an instructor at General Purpose. Great to be here.
Great. And just like last week, we have a rundown of the news. So the things that have happened in the last week in the AI space that you might have missed. You know, there's a lot going on and we've kind of curated it down to a small but manageable amount. And then Mel is going to lead us through a very interesting deep dive, a very topical deep dive. And then for the first time, we are going to be answering your questions. So you've got that to look forward to if you stick to the end. But first up, the news. Mel, what's been going on this week?
Oh, there has been loads going on. So first up, the EU has missed its deadline, which was the 2nd of May, to publish a voluntary code for forcing makers of ChatGPT style general purpose AI to reveal their training data, essentially. So the EU has been trying to put some guardrails, essentially, around the most advanced AI models, such as ChatGPT, Gemini, but it's not been an easy journey for them. So when they first released the EU AI Act, that was prior to generative AI becoming so powerful. So they now wanted to come up with a special code to deal with that in terms of regulation. But there has been a lot of pushback, especially from US companies, saying that the code deviated too much from what was outset in the initial EU AI Act. So definitely a space to watch.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, isn't it? It kind of goes back to our discussion last week about the geopolitical race between the US and China over who's going to get to AGI first, and Europe kind of not really being anywhere apart from on the regulatory front. And now it seems like the regulations are getting tied up in the discussions around tariffs and whatever, big tech really trying to kind of push back on EU regulation of AI. So I think it's going to be a kind of a very difficult time for the EU to try and enforce these kind of rules on generative AI providers when really, there is a risk that they turn around and say, well, fine, we're not going to deliver our services in your locale. I mean, Mel, you and I, prior to this call, one of the things that we discussed but aren't going to cover properly was the launch of the Meta AI assistant, which of course does not work if you are not in the US. Well, I mean, I think they work in Canada and Australia and stuff, but it doesn't work in the EU or the UK. And that is largely due to regulation. So again, there is definitely something going on there, some questions to be asked, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great summary of what is actually going on geopolitically. That also takes us actually to the next headline. So a recent paper came out titled The Leaderboard Illusion. And that basically revealed claims that US-based companies such as Meta, Google, and OpenAI are quietly testing dozens of hidden model variants. So they essentially test these variants and then release the best scoring variants to be highest ranking on these leaderboards that essentially test different model capabilities. And so prior to that, leaderboards such as, for example, Chatbot Arena were obviously the ones to go to understand, okay, how are these models ranking? But we didn't fully understand how the testing behind the scenes was working. So that just gave some quite shocking insights, I found.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that that's not something that we can lay just at the US companies, but they are the ones that kind of have been caught. This all blew up really because Meta's most recent model, Llama 4, went right to the top of the benchmarks when it came out. And then people started saying, hang on, there is no way this is better than ChatGPT or whatever. turned out that they had released a load of versions into the benchmark contest. Basically, the Chatbot Arena is a system, or it's a website where you ask a question and it will show you answers from multiple different AI assistants, but won't tell you which one the answer is from. And then you vote which one is the best answer. And based on that, it will create a ranking of which is the best assistant. However, Meta had trained their model or a specific version of the model for doing that exercise using the data, the questions that it knew were going to be asked in Chatbot Arena. And so it answered those really, really well and went right up the benchmark, went up to the top ranking, even though that wasn't the model that then got shit, because by making it good at answering those specific questions, they had made it worse at doing other things. So basically, the overall message to take away is that these benchmarks, you can't really use them as a kind of a cast iron, this is better than that. You have to actually try the different tools and assistants and get a sense of how it feels for you. Although there is a problem with that. You know, these models, they can be a little bit sycophantic. We tend to like models that are very nice to us.
That is absolutely true. So as we, might have been aware in terms of the headlines, OpenAI had released a very sycophantic model, which they had to roll back. So that was all over social media, people asking the model different questions and the model reacting overly positive, essentially. And rather sometimes than, stating or sharing facts, it would agree with the user. So it was perceived as too agreeable. But more about this and what actually sycophantic behavior is and means, we will talk about later on in the deep dive section.
Yeah. And while we're talking about OpenAI briefly, this week, a little update from last week's discussion about them trying to become a for-profit company, get rid of their not-profit arm. They have now backed off from doing that. They are going to be a for-profit company owned by a not-for-profit, but they are going to keep that not-for-profit as the kind of controlling body of the for-profit company. And that is largely, we think, driven by the fact that it was being opposed by Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and a bunch of other people. And I think they probably just felt like it wasn't worth the legal headache of trying to battle their way through this, when they would be better off just focusing on building the technology.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, who wouldn't like, being sued by Elon Musk? I mean, getting out of that lawsuit.
It's almost a rite of passage at this stage, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, enough of that. Let's move on to the next headline. So there have been a few headlines, news, and writings around the risks of AI and the impact on humans. And so there's a writer who emerged, who wrote a Medium post. She is called Elora Indran. And she essentially writes about using ChatGPT as a writing assistant and how that has changed her writing craft, essentially. And it's very interesting. She describes AI as a hyper efficient intern. And Tom, I'm aware that's what you refer to when you all compare AI with when we deliver trainings. And so she was saying, okay, within a few seconds, it gives you a really good draft, better than what humans can come up with. But then, however, human input, she has realized over time, and feedback is still required to draft, redraft, and make an article perfect. So I think that's what I've been observing as well when it comes to artists, when it comes to writers. So there is this initial excitement around getting a quick draft ready within seconds, when our human brains would take a lot longer to actually devise an article, think about a structure. But then actually, if someone is, an experienced writer, the first draft might not be perfect. And especially adjusting it to their writing style just takes some time and feedback.
I think the thing that I found most interesting about that essay actually was when she said that she works in PR, and she was saying that usually they rely on a PR agency to write the press release for their work. But because she was under time pressure, she decided to use ChatGPT to do it herself and was able to produce something in a couple of seconds that usually the agency took 3 days to do. And it was that kind of time saving and that no longer needing to go out to an external organization that I think was a kind of big benefit. And I think that this is going to be a kind of what I see as a key indicator of the kind of direction that AI is going to drive businesses in the short term, is that they are going to be able to do much more in-house because of AI. They're going to be able to use AI to fill those gaps where previously they might have gone out to external people. And I think that that is very exciting, both for businesses and even for small businesses. You might be sitting there thinking, oh, I'm a freelance writer. I'm absolutely terrified by this because where am I going to get my work from? But on the flip side, you may no longer need to hire an accountant as often, or, there could be a load of places that you could save money, or, perhaps you could use AI to help you do sales. I think this actually really goes back to, last week's essay on being a high agency individual. It's going to be those people who are able to direct the AI to do stuff, to be able to think of problems and then ask the AI to solve them for them, that are going to be okay. And there was also an article in the BBC about kind of some people who are actually actively saying no to using AI. I mean, they seem to be mostly motivated around the environmental impact, but I did kind of detect maybe the start of the kind of idea that human created stuff is almost like artisan. It's, you create stuff as humans and it is special because it was created in a slow way and takes a bit more work. And I don't know what you think about that, Mel, but perhaps that will become a thing.
Yeah, I think what really stood out to me about this article. So they interviewed different people in this BBC article. And there was a lady who runs a communications agency. And she said, basically, why would I bother to read something someone couldn't be bothered to write? As in, a human couldn't be bothered to write. It almost feels like she's saying, oh, that's cutting corners, that's making it easy for you. And I have encountered that view as well from a friend of mine who is a journalist. And she was, like, well, if I write the article with AI, I can't be bothered to do it, basically. I'm not putting the hard work in. And maybe that is linked to human value. And as you're saying, considering what humans do, what we do as a craft, essentially. But she also points out, obviously, that AI running these AI queries uses a lot of energy, and they're just very energy intensive, as we know, even 10 times more, uses 10 times more electricity than Google search queries. So there's a general concern about the environment as well.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Peter Magnus, a friend of General Purpose and one of the most talented branding people that I know, she always says that writing is kind of thinking. It's, that process of actually writing those drafts is the process of kind of thinking through the problem and understanding it. And so you can't kind of divorce the two. And if you are using AI to write your copy, you're not taking the time to properly think through what your brand should actually look like. And I think that there is probably some truth in that. I think that's going to be very interesting. Okay, Mel, we've got some positive AI news, right?
Yes, absolutely. So there have been some articles on a more positive note around that AI actually has got the potential to save lives. So a trial showed that AI-powered wearables can predict heart events up to an hour early, and that could in fact cut heart failure hospitalization by 1/3. which is obviously huge in a country like the UK, where we have a national health service that is really stretched, to minimizing or cutting the rates of hospitalization, and in that way also saving lives is enormous and quite significant.
Yeah. I think it can be so easy for all of us to get kind of wrapped up in generative AI in like ChatGPT and whatever. Oh, it can help me write some stuff more like quicker. Actually, AI does a bunch of things, because at the end of the day, what AI does is it takes some data and it predicts something from that data. And it turns out that there are all sorts of problems that can be solved through more accurate prediction. And I really love this stuff that's kind of going on in the healthcare space, because, you know, saving like 30% of people who have a heart attack or could have a heart attack, like avoiding them actually having that heart attack, is massive for those individuals, and it's massive for society as a whole. And I think that we almost kind of miss some of the kind of the potential of AI if all we ever discuss is kind of productivity. There's actually a load of other really interesting, exciting stuff going on. And there was another health related report this week as well, where a team in Sweden have been studying AI, or using AI to predict when people who have MS are likely to have relapses, so that they can switch up their drugs ahead of time to prevent it from happening or reduce the likelihood of it happening. And then that has been proven to be very, very successful and powerful. And again, it's like all these kind of little areas in your lives, or I mean, they're not little areas if you're impacted by them, but there's all these kind of things that don't fall under the kind of the standard productivity banner that could lead to people having much happier and healthier lives. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. One of my closest friends actually has got MS, and predicting that could potentially be absolutely life transforming, because obviously, it's not just having these relapses and the impact on health, but it's also life. So, how do I plan for that? How do I put insurance in place? What if I can't work for a while? So yeah, that is huge and definitely very exciting.
Really cool. And then a more practical news story to end on: Claude and MCP.
Yeah, so the Claude is getting more and more powerful and just got a whole new set of capabilities. At the core of this is the Model Context Protocol, or short MCP. So that's a framework that allows Claude to seamlessly interact with both local and remote services. So also services that run the cloud, for example, or so it now integrates with a whole range of workflow tools, essentially, such as Jira, Zapier, Square, PayPal, and so on and so forth, making it a lot more powerful and helping users just getting more and more tasks done.
For those of you that don't know, Claude is a kind of ChatGPT competitor made by a company called Anthropic. And at the heart of it, what MCP does is it allows Claude to connect into other services and control them, so that you can ask it to update your Google Docs, or read your email, or, send you something via WhatsApp or whatever. There's like a whole bunch of things. And particularly because it can connect to Zapier, there's thousands and thousands of services that can do that. And you've been able to do a version of this for a little while on the desktop app. I've had the Claude MCP on my desktop app for some time, and it's very useful, but you could only do it on the computer. And I find that actually a lot of the work that I do with AI assistants these days is while I'm out and about and I'm kind of talking with the assistant, kind of prompting away. And I keep thinking, oh, I really wish that Claude had access to my drive right now so that I could do some stuff. And I wish that I could get it to send this off, or connect to this kind of API that I use. And now it can. And that is going to be a huge productivity boost. I'm really, really excited about this. I think that if you have not used Claude yet, this is a really great time to go and give it a try. You do have to have either the Teams plan, the Enterprise plan, or the Claude Pro plan. which is the expensive $200 a month one. But if you do have a Teams plan, give it a try. Otherwise, maybe I would expect that this kind of MCP integration piece will be rolled out within the next few weeks to the remaining kind of pro accounts. So that will be a really good thing.
Definitely.
Good. So that's the news rounded up. But we mentioned that story about sycophancy, and Mel, you're going to tell us a bit more about what actually is sycophancy in a large language model.
Yeah, so basically, sycophancy is when the large language model decides to trade factual accuracy for agreement with the user. So it's super interesting. As you might know, large language models use a process called reinforcement learning from human feedback to be trained and improved. So when you use ChatGPT, for example, and it asks you, oh, do you prefer this response or that response? Often it gives you two options, and you read the two options and you go like, oh, actually the first one is better than the second. Based on your input, the model learns. And often what happens is that these human raters, they reward answers that they really like and that are quite positive. Because as humans, we are geared towards positive responses. So based on that, the model quickly learns the patterns and starts validating the users, and essentially to get the gold star or like a sticker. So these models then become endlessly agreeable. And as you know, someone on social media actually commented, can occasionally be misleading, such as in the instance of what happened with this OpenAI model.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's kind of a couple of interesting things, but the impact can actually be very real. There was an essay published in Rolling Stone this week about how people have convinced themselves that ChatGPT is their god, or even worse, that ChatGPT has agreed with them that they are God. And there are all these kind of people falling down kind of rabbit holes of AI fueled delusion, where the AI keeps agreeing with these kind of conspiracy theories that they are building up in their mind. And this article goes to interview like the partners of these people that it's kind of happened to. And they see in literally in the space of just a few weeks of kind of that person talking to ChatGPT consistently and it reaffirming these incorrect beliefs, like they start to believe very strange things about themselves and about the world. And there's kind of there's no way of easily breaking out of that. And it's actually really interesting because there are a lot of people who are turning to AI for forms of therapy, particularly maybe at the kind of the lower ends, like coaching and whatever. But, where they have not been able to get kind of proper medical support, they're asking for advice from ChatGPT. And now it turns out that advice may not always be that helpful and may actually be actively dangerous. A therapist would know if you started saying to, yeah, I'm really believing that I might be the next Messiah or whatever. They might start to kind of say, well, are you sure? Like, do you think that there could be any other explanation? ChatGPT does not do that. It just agrees with it. It goes, yes, you are great. Like, and so on. And I think it is actually a really interesting example of an unforeseen edge case. Nobody, when they were designing these AI assistants, would have thought that they could accidentally convince people to have spiritual delusions, but yet they do, apparently.
Yeah, and from a human angle, it can be fairly misleading. Just to add to what you said, recently we also saw articles saying that actually ChatGPT or, LLMs like ChatGPT tend to be more empathetic than doctors. So here in the UK, obviously a GP has 10 minutes to see a patient. They need to assess, they have to do their write-up. So there just isn't a lot of time for empathy or human connection. And they also might not be specifically, trained in that area as a therapist or whatever. However, ChatGPT comes across as very empathetic. So then, users might think, okay, everything it says is probably factual because it's just being so nice and it really gets me and understands me. So yeah, there is definitely a risk and, essentially people going down a route that can be slightly disillusional. I think going back to, behavior, and there was a recent paper that got released about that and that looked at sick eval. So that is essentially a peer-reviewed benchmark that detects these behaviors and looks at different interactions. And it splits sycophantic behavior essentially into two flavors. So that's progressive, when the model slips towards the correct answer, and regressive, when the model slips away from the correct answer. And that's when it becomes dangerous. And so that paper also compared different models and, to understand, okay, on this overall, let's say, yes bot scale, where do they sit? And actually, Gemini 1.5 Pro, with 62% of that scale, came out as the biggest sort of yes-saying, affirming, agreeable model, which to me was quite a surprise.
One of the things that I thought was so interesting about OpenAI released this blog that we mentioned, tried to kind of explain why they put this sycophantic version of ChatGPT live a couple of weeks ago and how they missed it. And one of the things that's so interesting about it is that the way that they measure it is they have a set of kind of automated benchmarks. So they run like automated tests and check that it doesn't like accidentally produce the recipe for anthrax or whatever. And then they do testing with some users to say, do you like this version or do you like this version? And if you use ChatGPT, you might well have seen this in the past where you're showing two things side by side and asked to pick the one that you prefer. And on both benchmarks, it did absolutely fine. In fact, people preferred it because it was being sycophantic. And so it's actually really, really difficult to pick up this kind of behavior in the AI models. And even though they had people internally that were like, something feels a little bit off, because all the numbers were correct, they said, all right, well, we'll put it live. And one of their big learnings that they wrote in their blog is from now on, if somebody internally who's testing it says, this feels a bit wrong, I can't really articulate why, but something doesn't feel quite right, that should be right, we're going to pause this and we're going to spend more time understanding it before putting it out to try and make sure that we don't have a repeat of this situation. So interesting, though. Honestly, it's really, really interesting, right?
Yeah, and also I was fairly reassured by the rollback. I think it was a good move. And also now all of these benchmarks, coming out, being reviewed and everything. And I assume or expect that maybe with the next generation of models, we hopefully will see more of a balance between warmth and warranted sort of disagreement, where it fits and, makes sure it conveys actual facts. So definitely a space to watch.
I mean, just kind of looking at that about paper, one of the things that kind of occurs to me is the models that were tested, none of them were reasoning models. And I would suspect that reasoning models would be a lot less sycophantic because of the way that they work. But I don't know, that feels like another kind of area to explore. Clearly a need for a follow-up paper there. And I suspect that this will now become an area of active research following on from last week or the week before's little snafu. Good. Okay. That's the deep dive done. And now for the first time, we've got a couple of listener questions that we are going to answer. So first up, a question from Alex. My company is looking at both ChatGPT and Copilot. Which is better and why? Mel, go on. You have first bite at that.
So I would say, with my consultant hat on, that it depends on your needs, the workflows you want to use the tool or the models for, and what you would like to achieve. So in terms of model quality and, essentially an output quality, ChatGPT definitely yields the best results. And Copilot essentially uses an older version of ChatGPT combined with its own Prometheus model. But when you use ChatGPT, you have access to their state-of-the-art models, including, as Tom mentioned, reasoning models that will just give you a better output because they use chain of thought thinking. Feel free to listen to our last episode if you want to find more about reasoning models. So yeah, definitely that's a pro when it comes to ChatGPT. However, if you're already using the Microsoft 360 suite of tools such as Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, the huge advantage of Copilot is that it sits within your Microsoft suite. And if you want to design a PowerPoint deck, for example, on a certain topic, it can give you a first draft within your PowerPoint using your company's, PowerPoint template within seconds. So that's a huge advantage. I, for example, personally love using Copilot within Microsoft Excel because I'm not very good at writing Excel formulas. So Copilot does it for me. So yeah, I think you need to weigh up, what is important to you? What are your goals? What are your day-to-day workflows that you want to use AI for to help you assist and automate?
Yeah, interesting. Can I ask you about just like before I give my answer? So what is your preferred model of the two? Like if you had to choose, if you could only have one, it's a desert island situation and you can only have one AI assistant, what would it be?
Oh, wow. That is a hard question, but I would say definitely ChatGPT. I use it for everything, and I love building my own custom GPTs, which is a mini program for a specific task. I do that a lot. If you want to find out how to do that, the AI Essentials course covers that. But also, I really think there's real value in using the reasoning models such as O3. And I'm also, in fact, very impressed with the new GPT 4.5 model. So yeah, that would be my to-go-to.
Yeah, super interesting. I too feel exactly the same way that, if somebody told me that I could only ever use Copilot again, I would feel very sad. I don't know what it is about using Copilot. There's just something about it. It just feels very like life force draining. Sorry,
Interesting.
sorry, Microsoft. I think it doesn't do what you want the first time. You can get it to do what you want, but it takes several tries often, and that could be quite a frustrating experience. I mean, by right, Copilot should win this like straight out, because I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying, the thing that's really annoying about ChatGPT is that I start writing an article, writing a proposal or whatever in ChatGPT. I kind of, ask some prompts, I get it to write the first version, it goes into Canvas. And then I've got something that's nearly there. So I'll put it into a Word document, and then I might get some feedback from some people. And then if I want to kind of get ChatGPT to make any amendments beyond that point, I'm having to kind of copy and paste that document back in, get it to make some changes, and then copy and paste it back out. And I'm doing a lot of copying and pasting backwards and forwards. And that's really annoying. And like, is there a better solution to it? And Copilot should make all of that go away. In my experience, it does not, because maybe, you're the Copilot pro here, Mel, but I find that even when you're using Copilot in Word, it doesn't seem to always work on the bit of the documents that you wanted it to work on. And, it will quite often shove the text at the bottom of the document and stuff. But I don't know. I kind of feel like there is still space for somebody to get that kind of combining AI tools and the tools that you use to do the other bits of your work together in a really good kind of seamless way. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see whether you get at that from the AI assistant end or whether you get at it from the kind of office productivity end. And I think that's going to be really interesting.
There's definitely on Microsoft's side improvements
Yes.
still to be made. And also just the last thing to mention is obviously multimodal reasoning. So ChatGPT is much better at understanding the content of images, for example, if you have an architectural diagram you wanted to read, and then building that into the response that you get, but also using voice and so on and so forth. So still way to go for Microsoft. I totally agree.
Great. And if you would like your questions answered next week, then please let us know at hi@generalpurpose.com and we will select a couple of questions to answer online. But otherwise, that's it for another week. Thank you so much, Mel.
Thank you, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast again.
Great. And thank you so much for listening, or if you are watching it on YouTube, for watching. As the kids say, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.